Hello, welcome to my little trip down road testing memory lane. Thanks very much for all your comments and questions. You've sent loads in. I've got a big old stash and I thought the next few videos I'll answer a few of those questions. So I've got some crackers lined up here. Without further ado, let us begin. The first one is from HKS071. Please give your 2 cents on chicken strip. Well, thanks for asking. The chicken strip, that's an interesting one, isn't it? So if you don't already know what a chicken strip is, I'm sure you do. It's that little bit on the edge of a tyre that you don't use. So when you use a tyre, obviously from new, it scuffs up, doesn't it? But if you don't lean the bike fully over, then you get a little band called a chicken strip. So they're interesting actually. Chicken strips, it's kind of a way of making fun of somebody, isn't it? Saying they've got big chicken strips, but that is not always the case. So let me explain. If you only ride on the road, I think that you should have chicken strips, because if you're leaning so far over on the road that you're scrubbing the chicken strips out and you've got a nice even tyre, you're doing one of two things. You're either going incredibly fast through corners, or you aren't sitting on the bike properly. You're giving it a load of lean when the bike shouldn't really be leant over. You've probably got a straight arm, inside arm in corners. So you're leaning the bike far too far over. So if you see a bike with chicken strips on the road, it probably means that they have a good body position, they're safe and sensible, and yeah, they probably know what they're doing. On the track, chicken strips are a little bit different. Most people, I mean, I'm talking from experience here from the Run Aslan Race School that I used to instruct at, so I see a lot of riders. Most people lean a bike on the track over too far in the middle of the corners. Most people that come from road riding, unless they've got the right body position. So a lot of riders are more than likely not to have chicken strips. But then again, a racer won't have chicken strips either, because they'll be going a lot faster through corners. So chicken strips aren't really a good gauge of your riding ability on track. But where you do get chicken strips on bikes on track is generally on the front tyre. Normally people use the whole of the rear tyre, but the front tyre, there's quite often chicken strips. Even if you're going really, really quick, even if you look at a racer's bike, sometimes there'll be a small bit of chicken strip on the side of the tyre. And that's generally nothing to do with the rider. It's more to do with the bike setup. So generally, if the front of the bike's too high, there's too much preload, you're not using all the tyre as you lean over. Sometimes it could literally be the way the profiles work on the tyre, the front and rear tyre, that you don't get the tyre fully over. It could be a multitude of things, which leaves you with a front chicken strip. But I don't really hear people talk in terms of chicken strips anymore. But chicken strips aren't a bad thing. I think chicken strips should be celebrated. Chicken strips and turkey twizzlers, whatever you fancy. But thanks very much for the question. Next is from Morris Bagnall. Thanks for your question. You spoke about a 6-year break from motorbikes after your accident. Would you talk about that period? Was it the physical recovery, mental recovery, or other influences that kept you from riding? Yeah, well, I had a monster crash in 1994 on an RGV 250 where I collided with a car. The car was coming down the road one way, I was coming up the road the other way, and as we drew level, the car turned into a junction on the right and I hit the side of it. Absolutely smashed myself to pieces, which meant I didn't ride a bike for 6 years really. So, you know, when I had 9 operations to save my legs and my wrists, and got loads of nerve damage right at the beginning, I didn't really know what was going on. I'm a bit of a daze for the first few months, but then after that I always wanted to ride bikes. The things that stopped me riding for the first few years to begin with was the fact that I had drop foot in my left leg. So that was basically due to nerve damage around my knee. So I had to wear a splint in my shoe, so I couldn't change gear. maybe I could have done what Ian Hutchinson's done, put the gear lever on the right. I never thought of that, I just have now. So that was the first thing that stopped me. The second thing that stopped me was my knees would barely bend past 90 degrees. So I couldn't physically get my feet on foot pegs. And even now they don't completely bend, and I really struggle with cramped bikes, which is why, you know, the thought of riding a Fireblade or an RSV4 or a ZX10 fills me with horror, because I just can't fit on the bike properly, and I've had to develop a different riding technique, which ironically is what a lot of MotoGP riders do, where they kind of ride flat-footed, but they turn their toes in so they can reach the back brake. Not all riders do it, but some MotoGP riders. If you look at, say, Pol Espargaro, he does it. A few other riders do it. James Hayden used to do it. So ride flat-footed and your knee isn't as bent. So that physically stopped me for a while. From a mental point of view, I always wanted to get back on bikes, and I always try to find a motorbike replacement. You know, in those 6 years, you know, I bought a fast car, used to ride jet skis a lot, but I just used to be envious and jealous and a little bit kind of bitter and twisted about not being able to ride. Every time I saw a bike, I was like, oh God, I really wish I could ride. I kept on reading all the bike magazines all the way through, you know, PB and Superbike and Bike, and read MCN every week. So that kind of kept my fire burning. And then my drop foot ended up coming back after a couple of years. It's kind of 80% there now. Sometimes I trip over my own foot, but generally I can run, I can do everything, I can ride a bike. But yeah, a few physical things stopped me to begin with. But then as soon as I was able to, 2000, I bought a Ducati 916. 2001, did a few nice little trips with it, with my friends, to the Nürburgring. And then 2002, I got my job as a road tester. And then I haven't looked back. So yeah, I'm glad I was able to ride again anyway. But thanks very much for your question, Morris. Next one is Brilliant Speed Superbikes. Thanks very much for your question. Right, this is a geeky one. You can wind forward on this one if you want. And this is talking about one of my race bike videos. What kind of geometry changes did you have to make to use the 265 profile slick? I'm hearing you need to lengthen the chain or change the sprocket to make a 265 fit a 2023 BMW S1000RR. Well, that's a very specific question. 265 slick is obviously taller than a 255 slick. That used to be the slick of choice, and because it's higher, you basically just need to reduce the ride height of the bike to suit. So you can either do that with the ride height adjuster on the shock. You end up changing the rear ride height if you put different gearing on it, that kind of stuff. But generally the back of the bike comes down to counteract the bigger tyre. In terms of that tyre actually fitting the S1000RR, it fits straight in. We haven't had to make any changes to the chain or the sprocket or anything like that. It just goes in. The only thing that is a little bit different is that the tyre warmers don't quite fit as snugly with the bigger tyre. But there you go. Thanks for the question. Right, let's see if we can get something a bit more mainstream now. Oh, another specific from HB1. I currently use SBS dual carbon pads, but I'm interested in using the dual sinters, as I've heard they last much longer in comparison, as well as offering better brake performance. Does the extra pad life come at the cost of disc wear? I'm weighing up what's best in terms of cost v performance. Well, again, this is about my racing bike. With my long-term test bikes or test bikes in general at MCN, you never really keep them long enough to change brake pads. And the weak link with brakes on road bikes now is the ABS system. That's what removes all the feel and the power. But in terms of my racing bike, my S1000RR, even my R1 before that, ever since I've been racing, even the GSX-R1000 before that, probably since about 05, I've been using SBS pads, which are brilliant. You've got two race pads, types of race pads is dual carbon or dual sinter. The dual carbon pads, fantastic. They're both performance is really high. The dual carbon pads are cheaper, but they wear out faster, so they'd only last a couple of race meetings at the most, get a lot of brake dust off them, and they don't work so well when they're cold. But the dual sinter are incredible. When you pull the brake lever, it's like hitting a brick wall, I would imagine. They just don't seem to wear. They last, sometimes they last half a year in a race bike. They don't give off any brake dust. In terms of disc wear, we've never noticed the disc wearing out by using them. So, you know, if you can afford them, they are very expensive. But if you look at a period of time, they probably work out cheaper than keep throwing pads that wear out more at it. So, yeah, I wouldn't worry about disc wear. But if you want sort of the ultimate braking performance that I've used, there's lots of amazing pads out there anyway. But the SBS dual sinter pads are fantastic. Thanks, HB1. Right. This one is from Epic Squid. Epic Squid. I should have known that from the picture. Uneasy, your love affair with the GSX-R750 is well documented. However, I don't think I've ever heard you speak about your favourite 750. So, in a completely hypothetical situation in which Suzuki offered you, to manufacture you a 750 of your choice, that'd be nice. Any model you fancy straight off the production line, which model would you choose, and what modifications, if any, do you make your new or potentially old bike? That is an amazing question. Well, yeah, GSX-R750 is one of my favourite bikes, just because it's that old cliche, the best balance of power and handling. I mean, it's still winning races now. If you look at British Super Sport, there's GSX-R's winning. Obviously, they're having to be throttled back a little bit, so they're on parity with the 600s, but there's life in the old dog yet. So, you know, I like them for that reason. And then they mean a lot to me because a GSX-R750J Slingshot I had when I was 18. It was the first bike I ever raced, first bike I ever crashed, first bike I ever broke bones on. And they just mean a lot to me. So also my kind of fascination with Kevin Schwantz back in the day. He obviously rode one in AMA. He rode GSX-R750s, the famous transatlantic races when he was battling with Rainey, which is just amazing, Brands Hatch. He rode a GSX-R750 Slingshot at Daytona in '88 before he started with Pepsi Suzuki. So it just means a lot to me. So in answer to your question, I would have 3 GSX-R750s. The first one would be to have a blue and white 1988 GSX-R750J Slingshot, which was my first bike, and I would just love that bike just in mint condition. I mean, to me then, as an 18-year-old, that had come off an LC and an AR80 and an MB5. It was a missile. It was kind of a poor man's RC30 of the day, and in racing it never really did much, unless you were James Whittam. But to me it was amazing. It was nervous, it was tank slappy, didn't have much ground clearance, which ultimately caused my crash at Brands Hatch when I first ever raced it. The exhaust touchdown, lift the back wheel up off the floor around clearaways, and it high-sided me off and I broke my foot. But yeah, I'd love one of those. I would love, because it was just unobtainable at the time, a 1989 GSX-R750RR, which is kind of the homologation version of the J Slingshot, which actually had the older slab-sided long stroke motor in it, because it was more tunable for racing, and they just looked amazing, and I'd love one of those. So those 2 old 750s I would just love in standard condition, just to look at really, or just take out on a Sunday if my wrist could handle it. And then the GSX-R750 to ride now, I'd have to go for the current model. Even though it's been discontinued in the UK, it's still made around the world, which that came out in 2011 and it's still being made. So I'd have one of those. I would put fork internals in it. I'd put a rear shock, put 1 tooth smaller front sprocket on it, sort the brakes out because they faded and they weren't very powerful, different master cylinder, pads, lines, and tyres. And I think that would probably be the perfect track day bike. Or just get one of the British Super Sport GSX-R750s. That would probably be that's that bike. But that's probably restricted with an ECU to bring it down to power. So if you could have a full power version of that, that's what I'd have. But yeah, you got me dreaming about 750s now. So thank you, Mr. Squid. Very good question. Right, next one is from Matthew Thornalley. Looking to become the owner of an ill-handling, unreliable red money pit because I'm opposing in the next few months. A serious question though, what would you choose on the basis it's a once-in-a-lifetime basis to own something a bit exotic and indulgent? I had it in my head to go for a V4S, but I started looking at the 1299S and the 1199S, 1199R model for similar money, or for a bit less I can get a like-for-like 9 in terms of mileage and condition. What would you recommend? Well, you know, we all buy motorbikes with our heart, really, don't we? The toy motorbikes anyway, the ones we need for work, the workhorses you buy with your head, but everything else you buy with your heart. And I think if you want to scratch your Italian motorcycle itch, I'd say go for it. You know, when we're road testing, you don't really bring emotion into it. It's very, you're kind of very clinical when you're comparing bikes and when you're talking about bikes, because you know, you kind of got to take your own preconceptions, your own enjoyment, your own opinions out of it a little bit, because you're reviewing bikes for the reader and you're reviewing bikes for the kind of person that's going to buy that particular bike. So, for example, if I rode a GS, I wouldn't really talk about its peg scraping ability, because that's not the point. You might touch on it. You know, with my road testing hat on, I would say that those old Panigales, the old V-twin Panigales, like I've said in a previous video, they're quite angry, they're quite difficult to ride, they're quite stiff, but I think if I owned one and opened the door to my garage and just looked at its beauty, then yeah, there's nothing anybody could say to put me off of it. I think if you really fancy something like that, go for it. I mean, the 1299s are more refined than the 1199, so if you were going to go for a V-twin Panigale, get a late one. But conversely, if you went for an 1199, that's the first of the breed, and that's something special as well, isn't it? Taking it a stage further, if you wanted a Panigale that actually rides beautifully, go for an 899 or a 959 or a V2, because they're the best of both worlds. They've got the beauty and they're properly, beautifully sorted bikes as well. But yeah, just go for it, even if you sell it in a couple of years because it's ruined your wrists and your knees and all the rest of it. If you need to scratch that itch, you know, they say in cars that every petrol head needs to own an Alfa Romeo, don't they? Even though they're not so good. But I mean, the Ducatis are obviously very, very good. A Japanese bike or a S1000RR is better, but it doesn't have that character, does it? So yeah, go for it. And if you want something that, you know, is refined, go for the 1299. If you want something angry and original, go for the 1199. But thanks for your question. That's a nice little choice as well. Thanks, Matthew. Right. This is from CRT. Hi, Nevesy. Thanks for the great videos. Thank you very much. I'll be blunt. I was out riding with a friend who died in a crash. And since then, my own riding has gone down the toilet. The bike didn't cause his accident. He had a heart attack. But seeing it happen seems to have ruined my confidence. I'm now extremely uptight when riding, which upsets the bike in the bends, and to be honest, it's become quite stressful. Any advice on potential courses, etc. would be appreciated. I love bikes, but I'm starting to think about hanging up my lid for good. Cheers. Well, thanks very much for your question, CRT, and I'm very, very sorry to hear about your friend. That must have been an awful situation, and I can completely see why you feel the way you do. You know, the advice I would give you, that I give other people, you know, when it comes to riding is really to take your time with it and let it come to you. So, you know, if you're low on confidence in corners and it's really spoiling your ride, you could do a number of things. You know, just go out on your own I'd always recommend that. You know, when you're out with other people, sometimes it's easy to get kind of carried away or frustrated that you can't keep up or whatever. You know, go out, ride your own ride. Doesn't matter how quick you are, you know, just go really, really steady and just let that confidence, you know, just like a drip of confidence. Eventually your confidence cup will be full, and it only takes drip after drip after drip to fill it up. You don't need to, I think with any, like I've said before, to build your confidence up on any bike, you just need to take your time. So, you know, go out and take your time, let it come to you. There's no rush, there's no deadline to be good. You just want to enjoy it, don't you? The choice of bike can really make or break your confidence. You know, if you've got a big, difficult to ride motorcycle, they're not that easy. You know, maybe go for something smaller, maybe like a retro bike, something like that. You know, like a mid capacity, you know, 600 to 900 kind of cc retro or naked, something like a Royal Enfield Interceptor, something like that. They're fantastic. Those small bikes just load you with confidence, just really do. And the kind of the bigger and more powerful and heavier the bikes, the more they take to ride. You know, a lot of people ask me advice of bikes, like friends never listen ever. And they'll say, what bike should I get? You know, they give me a choice, there's big bikes, small bikes. I say, we'll go for the smaller one, work up. No, I want the big one. They get the big one. They never really seem to enjoy it. You know, and I look and think, wow, you know, you could have a lot better time on a smaller bike. But I mean, that's by the by. But so that's the other thing. The bike choice is a big thing to restore your confidence. And of course, training is a really, really good idea. You know, whether it's your local bike school who do refresher courses, you know, take it nice and easy and build up, or there's advanced riding courses, or there's people like Rapid Training who we use at MCN. They help us out with a lot of features. They help us out with a lot of the staff go on riding courses, me included. You know, just to keep your skills sharp. So yeah, you can't have enough training. You can't have enough information to absorb. You know, whether it's looking at YouTube videos about riding, whether it's getting inspired by other people's adventures, but it sounds like it's gonna, you know, it's not going to be a quick fix. And you know, I really hope you don't hang up your lid, because you know, motorcycling is an amazing pastime, an amazing hobby, which is why we all love it. So yeah, let me know how you get on. But thanks very much for the question. The next one is from Michael S. Great name. Thanks for the question. Back on. Trouble is, for most bikers, this is about tyres, tyre testing. We want to know what tyres feel between 1,000 and 4,000 miles in. All new tyres feel great, but how long do they feel great for? I've found Metzeler and Michelin are the best longevity. Pirelli, after 1,000 miles, I can feel traction control intervention more often. But how does anyone test a 3,000 mile all conditions? I'd love to see a sports stroke naked bike test on wet roads in the winter, as on dry, hot or track grip is so close between the tyres, it's not a result that bears much value to the life cycle of the tyres. Great question. I agree. Well, first of all, your last point. Yeah, the kind of performance of sporty track day tyres is generally kind of measured in tenths on a racetrack, and it doesn't really bear much credence to how long they last. It's just a performance thing. But in terms of sports touring tyres, which you mentioned, MCN and Ride have just published a sports touring tyre comparison test, which I did along with the Ride editor Matt Wildy, where we lucked in on the weather, and all the tyres we tested were done on the same day in the same wet and cold conditions, and that was really, really interesting. But it's really difficult to do longevity tests with tyres, because it just the amount of time it would take and the amount of miles you'd need to do, and you know, you just couldn't do it. It's one of the functions of magazines, MCN, Bike, Ride, their long-term test fleets, where the owners of their long-term test bikes try different tyres throughout the year, and they'd be able to give feedback on how tyres feel after a while. A lot of tyre companies, when you go to tyre launches, they'll talk about the consistency of performance through the life cycle of a tyre. And obviously they all claim that the consistency is there, you know, right until the wear markers, but that's not always the case, because you know the shape of the tyre changes as it wears. You know, the rears will start to square off a little bit. I mean, generally, if you're worried about tyre longevity, sports touring tyres are the way to go for. You know, on average, it depends on the bike and the rider and where you ride and how you ride. Sports touring rear tyre would last between 4,000 and 6,000 miles before you sort of get any drop in performance. But sports tyres obviously a lot less, because you know they're grippier and they wear out faster. Yeah, it's really difficult to talk about, you know, what a tyre's like 2,500 miles in, but generally you can kind of guess. The stickier the tyre, the less performance you're going to get out of it in a, you know, when it starts to wear out. But good question. You didn't say what bike you've got, but yeah, if you're just riding on the road, you know, you don't really need much more than a sports touring tyre, and then, you know, that will kind of stay consistent for a long time. But thanks very much for your question. And now we're into the last one. This is from Andrew Price. Hi, Andrew. Hi, Michael. Greetings from Melbourne, Australia. You may recall we swapped opinions on the Speed Triple RR last year. Yep, I remember that because you bought one. Question: would you agree that Triumph completely dropped the ball with the Speed Triple RR and RS1200 models, but have now redeemed themselves completely with the new Street Triple 765R and RS? By all accounts, this seems to be the case. Also, I recently found an old Bikes Allowed video from 20 years ago with the infamous John Cantley in it. Did you ever have the chance to work with him before he disappeared? Love listening to your videos while resting my 56-year-old bones in my massage chair. That sounds good. Okay. Triumph with their Speed Triple. I don't think they've really dropped the ball, so to speak. I know that, you know, the RS Super Naked is a fantastic bike. Maybe it's a little bit too stiffly sprung for the road. It probably could have done with electronic suspension, but it's still a great bike. But doesn't really have the pizzazz of a KTM or a BMW or an Aprilia or a Ducati. Kind of stays a little bit under the radar, but really capable bike, fantastic handling bike. And then the RR version, I run one of those as a long-termer. Again, fantastic, but the clip-ons are way too low, which really spoils it. The new Street Triples are just fantastic. You know, you can read all about those in our MCM reviews and videos, but Street Triples have been amazing motorcycles since, you know, they first came out in 2006. They've just got that perfect blend, a bit like a GSX-R750 really. You know, it's just one of those bikes that is the answer to most people's questions. And then Bikes Allowed. Do you remember that? I think that was on Menem Motors. And yeah, John Cantley was in it. I think Chris Moss was in it. Who else? Louise Brady. Was that her? Sometimes there was a bit of collaboration with MCN in it. I used to enjoy watching that. In actual fact, they did a few episodes where they talked about the MCN road test idle process, which I did and I won. So I kind of had my first 5 minutes of fame on Bikes Allowed. John Cantley, I met him a few times on launches. I never really met him, but obviously the situation, you know, is very sad now. No one knows where he is, which is a real shame. But I really enjoyed reading him when he was in Superbike. He's a really fast rider. When I met him on a few occasions, he's one of those guys. When I first started, I was quite intimidated because, you know, he was an established journo, established magazine editor, and I had a big bucket full of imposter syndrome when I first started. So, you know, when I ever was around him, I never felt worthy. He's hyper intelligent as well. Could have quite a sarcastic wit. Sometimes you never quite knew if he liked you or not. I'm sure he did. And yeah, it was a really nice guy. I went with him on a couple of launches. One that I remember would have been the first big launch I went on, which was the 2000 it was for the 2004 underseat pipe Fireblade launch, which is at the end of 03 in Arizona in America. And yeah, that was like one of those launches where it was just awe-inspiring for me, because we flew all the way there. You know, I think we had a couple of days each side of the ride to sort of acclimatise to the time zone. And he was there. He was just one of those wow characters for me. But yeah, a really nice guy, and who knows, he might resurface one day. Hope he does, but I'm not sure. But anyway, thank you very much for your question, Andrew. And I reckon we'll draw a line under that for today. There's loads more questions. I'll dig some more out for another video soon. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, and I will see you soon.